Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We're here today to have a conversation about the tragic events that occurred in Minneapolis and the death of George Floyd in police custody. My name is Rebecca Starkey-Kiesling, and I'm the Director of Public Information and Community Engagement for the City of Hutchinson. I'm here at City Hall with Chief Jeff Hooper and Human Relations Officer Datjaeda Moore to discuss the events. I'll be keeping an eye on Facebook comments and questions, so if you have a question you would like to throw out there or something you'd like shared into the room, please go ahead and feel free to share that in Facebook. But for now, I'm going to let Datjaeda take over.
Thank you. I'm really grateful for this chance to kind of address the community and spend some time talking with our chief of police here in Hutchinson. Really, I think I want to start this conversation kind of from your perspective about what you think you want the community to know about how you're addressing on the local level the things that are happening in Minneapolis and just across the country as a whole.
Yeah, and I think as you see these events, these tragic events occurring across the country, we would be naive to think that that doesn't have an impact on us here locally. The community, you feel the tension rise in the community. It affects the police officers that are trying to serve that community. And at the Hutchinson Police Department, the culture that we're trying to build at this agency is one of service to the community. One of our key driving principles is that community engagement. And there's nothing more important than we do in our agency. We talk a lot about, and I talk to my officers in reference to when they pin this badge on their chest, that should not be a reflection of the authority that you have over the community, but instead that's a reflection and a promise in your commitment to serve the community and treat people in the right and proper fashion. And as we see these events come up, it's important in the law enforcement field, especially here locally, that we learn from them and we adapt and we become better people, better servants of our community. We have a very high moral and ethical character here at the Hutchinson Police Department, a high expectation. I am 100% open and open with the public and the community. We hold ourselves accountable. There are men and women behind these uniforms, and they're just people, and we're going to make mistakes. But when we do, we have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to use those mistakes to become better servants of our community. Specifically, if you look at the events that occur and the event that occurred in Minneapolis, we address those type of events in training constantly. We talk about the emotions that are behind those events. We talk about things like excited delirium, positional asphyxia, excessive use of force, how officers can cope with and deal with the emotion of those situations and be able to de-escalate, how other officers then can come in and assist. And if they see an officer acting excessively or acting out of bounds, other officers can come in and assist that officer who may be emotionally charged and make sure that we're able to treat each and every situation both safely for us and safe for the community.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. I think the training piece is key, but like we have talked before, I don't think we want to think that this kind of situation can't happen in a second or split second of a moment, but this particular death took such a long time. It gave the officer plenty of time to think about his actions. So I'd like to just kind of hear how you are kind of counseling your officers about what to do if they're in that circumstance, in that situation, dealing with that particular, if they were the officer there arresting George Floyd, what would they have done differently?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we emphasize both in training and through our culture. A situation like that, it's not uncommon or it's fairly typical for an officer to place somebody on the ground in order to handcuff them. But we worry about having people placed on the ground because of the position that they're in. Certainly, we never train to put our knee across the back of somebody's neck. And in those situations, if we get somebody secured in handcuffs, our procedure is we set them up immediately so that they're able to sit up and breathe again, and we're not putting them in a compromising situation any longer than is absolutely necessary for safety.
I appreciate you sharing that because I think there's some information that comes from the police perspective that is unknown to the general public. So understanding those processes and procedures are going to be critical. One of the things that I continue to hear is, these situations could come. To be preemptive, talk a little bit about what you're doing as far as building what we would consider a necessary need for trust within the community and law enforcement.
Yeah, and that was when I came to the city of Hutchinson and assumed the role as the chief of police. My primary mission and the mission that still is our primary focus at the Hutchinson Police Department is to develop that relationship with our community. We have to develop that trust, and you have to look at it, and I talk to every one of my officers and anybody that sits in front of me that's requesting to be hired from me to be a police officer and a servant in this community. I have a conversation with them about having that true servant heart. I don't want in my department what I call badge-heavy officers that are just there to enforce the law and enforce their will on others. I want officers that truly want to serve this community and make this community a better place. So one of the things we have really focused on, we call them community engagements. And I like to say that every engagement, every time we have the opportunity to speak with somebody in this community, that's an opportunity for either a positive encounter or a negative encounter. An opportunity to gain positive or to gain community trust, or an opportunity to hurt our trust with the community. And so we really instill in our officers that every call is important. Every engagement with our community is important. Every engagement leads to that community trust. Because I don't give my officers the authority. The city doesn't give them the authority to enforce the law. The state doesn't. True authority comes, or true ability to help serve this community comes from the community. If the community doesn't allow us to serve them, then we're an outsider just trying to enforce laws. We need to work with our community with a joint effort to be able to serve and make the community better. And that's the message that I try to portray inside my agency and anybody in the community that we have the opportunity and honor to converse with.
I appreciate that. Chief, you've been here a little under 2 years, so you have done quite a bit in the community. I didn't get to see the previous administration, but I heard and continue to hear the impact that administration had on the community. Your ideal and leadership of really changing that relationship is significant for us. Tell us about how you're addressing some of those old feelings that people may still harbor about their relationship with the Hutch Police Department.
Yeah, and I wasn't here during those times so I can't really speak to what happened with the old administration. But what I can speak to is that when I came into the agency, the relationship between the police department and the community was broken. There was a lack of trust in the police department from the community. And I knew that we had to build that trust back. We had to earn that trust back. And for us to sit back and say, well, the community has to come to us is absolutely the wrong approach. I knew that we had to be the ones first, because we were the ones that had lost that trust with the community, the agency as a whole. We had to be the ones first to reach our hand out to the community and said, we are here as part of this community. We are here to help you. Did we get our hands slapped a couple times? Absolutely, because we had to earn that trust back with the community. And the more we reach out and the more we show the community that we're here to help them, the more trust that we earned, and then we can start making a change in this community together as a family.
I do have a question from Facebook. Let's see, actually, our mayor has asked, what sort of implicit bias or racial profiling training do our officers get? And how can the city invest more heavily in our officers on this front?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. All the officers get that training in the academy, and then we have annual training. I also have my professional standards division that when a new officer comes in, they sit down before they ever even go to the academy and talk about ethics, talk about morals, talk about our core values, and talk about that implicit bias. And I think it's important to know that we have to recognize, to say that you don't have any biases is naive. Everybody has a bias. And in law enforcement, it used to be that we tell our officers, don't be biased. Well, they can't help but to have their internal feelings. What we have to train our officers is you have implicit bias. you have to be cognizant enough and you have to be self-reflective enough to be able to see that you have biases. And you have to be able to identify them. And then your actions cannot be reflective of your biases. You have to treat people fair in spite of your biases. And the first step to that is realizing that those biases exist. And that's a very important point and a very hard lesson for our officers to learn. But in answer directly to the question, they get it before they go to the academy, they get it at the academy, and they get it annually. So,
do you feel like it's enough to ensure that that people are getting the message of tolerance or acceptance of the police department within the community? Do you feel that the community is seeing that type of training directly?
I would like to think that it creates better officers. It creates officers that are more caring, and I think that the approach on every call from every officer is a reflection of that type of training, that and other training. We had a conversation earlier with another group, and one of the things I talked about, because when we were sitting with a group of minorities, I look at life through my lens. I'm a white male and I'm a police officer, and those are the lenses that I see life. Those are the lenses I see the community from. Different members of our community, especially our minority community, they see the community through a totally different lens. And I think that what we have to do is have these conversations, connect with those different groups, try to at least see things through their lens, and that bridges that gap like you're talking about of understanding of that culture. So I may not have lived your life, but hopefully I can understand it just a little bit, and it helps me be able to serve and build that relationship with you better.
What do you do with the officers that kind of are refusing to really address their own biases? I mean, how do you manage those officers? How do you help direct or guide those officers? Do you take action? They may not have violated any particular policy per se, but maybe their social behaviors are indicative of something that could be dangerous. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. We have 3 core values: honesty, integrity, and professionalism. And every time we interact with somebody, it doesn't matter if it's a specific violation of policy, the expectation is that you treat that person fairly, you treat them professionally. And individuals that may not have a servant heart, may not have that caring heart, may not have that ability, and they start acting out on those biases, and they're not recognizing that, and they're treating people poorly, they can't work for me. They can't work for this community. They can't serve the citizens of Hutchinson, because the citizens of Hutchinson deserve more than that. And we're here for them. And I won't tolerate somebody on my agency that doesn't have the heart and the caring and doesn't treat people the right way.
That's good to hear. I have another question, kind of from that. If a resident has an experience that they feel was unfair, was profiling, racial profiling, gender profiling even, what do you want the public to do? How do you want them to handle that or respond to that?
Yeah, and that's one of those things. One of the first things I did when I got here, when I restructured the department, I put in the Office of Professional Standards, and I put a Captain Pickard, in charge of that, and a lieutenant in that. And one of the primary functions coming out of that Office of Professional Standards is to make sure that the standards that we set in our department are professional. And we have a complete and organized internal affairs function inside the agency. And I would hope that anybody that feels that way or that occurred to them, I hope that they would feel comfortable in coming to me directly. And I have not turned down a meeting with any concerned citizen in this community since I have been here. If they want to have a meeting with me, they can have a meeting and they can sit down and talk to me face to face. And I hope that I've built up enough trust with this community that they would feel comfortable in coming in and discussing that with me. We will open an internal affairs investigation, and we will investigate that fully. If we find out that we violated their rights, violated policy, violated just treating them decently, we will hold ourselves accountable. I'm open and honest and upfront with that with the community. If we've made a mistake, we'll admit to that mistake. We'll hold ourselves accountable. We'll correct that action and make sure it never happens again, and we'll use that as a learning, growing experience to become better servants of this community.
I just want to jump in really quick and thank the people that are joining us on Facebook. People keep coming in. I want to make sure you guys know that we are monitoring the feed on Facebook. So if you have any questions or anything that Chief Hooper or Datjaeda can answer, or that you'd like to hear discussed a little more, feel free to type it in the comments and we will let them know. So go ahead.
Thank you. You know, Chief mentioned something that I just kind of want to touch on a bit, is this relationship. I think that is such a key term for what we see happening in communities like Hutchinson. This opportunity to have a direct line of access to the chief of police, especially for Black communities and brown communities, is so critical. And to be honest, it's probably a rare thing. I've been in other communities where you only see the chief of police on TV, and it's only during a time of tragedy. So to be able to sit and have a conversation with you and be able to bring forth even those uncomfortable experiences is a luxury that Hutchinson kind of has access to. How do you address those that still feel, because of their experiences in other communities, still have that anxiety? I think about Black males who have an innate anxiety almost because of the circumstances and the society that we live in. How do you feel you can address those types of relationships, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Datjaeda, and it, you know, I understand that those tensions run high, and I can't even begin to put myself in their shoes and what they've grown up. And we've talked a little bit about the lens and talked about those feelings are true, and they're there, and they're emotional, and it's that raw emotional. And all we can do is, when we are dealing with somebody that's emotionally charged like that, is passionate about their rights, we have to, we talked about this a little bit, we have to stop and listen, right? We have to stop and really hear the message and hear what they're trying to tell us, because we at least have to be able to understand their space, where they're coming from. And this happens a lot in law enforcement encounters with people on the street. They're coming from a very passionate place. They're emotionally charged. An officer may be just coming out of a situation where their life was in danger. They're emotionally charged. So you got two emotionally charged human beings, people. And if they don't stop, calm down, and listen to each other, and try to and open up that lines of communication, that's where situations then escalate. And so one of the things that we really focus on in law enforcement, especially here recently, is teaching officers how to communicate better, teaching officers how to de-escalate those tensions. It used to be years and years ago in the 60s and 70s in law enforcement, officers were the biggest burly guys that you can get, and they would just come in and grab people or quite frankly beat them and take them to jail. And that's not the way you serve your community. Now, the officers, at least that I'm hiring on my department, are officers that have the ability to talk to people, that have that caringness in their voice to really understand people. Those are the officers that are valuable. Those are the officers that truly serve this community.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And to that very point, because of that history, because of that very deeply rooted experience that so many have had, it's going to take some time to change that feeling, to build that trust. And so I appreciate that you're trying to do that now. One of the things that's happening here in this local space is a cry for acknowledging racial issues at this local space, in coordination with what has happened in Minneapolis. A young person has come to us talking about doing a protest. How do you feel about the importance of that type of demonstration of rights and what people are experiencing?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in people's rights. I'm a strong believer in everybody being able to have a voice. And I think that those type of events allow people to have a voice, allow people to talk and work through those emotions. And I think that's a healthy thing. I think that's a good thing. I think that's positive for our community. You can only hope that other individuals in the community actually stop and listen to that voice. And when you talk about a protest or you talk about a demonstration, there's always people on the other side of that have charged emotions or their own personal feelings. And the hope is that everybody will respect everybody else's opinion. Everybody will respect their voice and allow people to be able to get their message out. And I'm hoping. I know that we have that plan for this weekend. I think it has the potential to be an amazing event here for Hutchinson. And I'm just hoping that the community wraps their arms around the positivity that can bring, as opposed to sometimes those events have the tendency to turn negative.
Yeah.
So
I appreciate that. There's so many different things that we've talked about over the course of these last several days. But one thing that I thought may be important for us to share at this space is how do we begin to educate folks about what racism is, how to eliminate certain behaviors, but not only in the police department, but within the community at large. What kind of things do you think have been helpful to you, or you think could be helpful to the community to start really addressing racial disparities for this local level?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and we've talked a little bit about it in the last couple of days, is just awareness. People have to recognize that we do have racial issues here in Hutchinson. We do have that at our local level, not just from the police department, but amongst the community. And I think that we have to get to a place where we are able to come together as a community. And that's one of the things I love about Hutchinson. It's such a great community because there's so many people that care about this community and making it a great place to live. If there's an issue in this community, people step up to address that issue. And knowing that there's all that caring in this community, just being a part of that and being able to bring those different groups together for an open and honest discussion. I think I'm a firm believer in people. I'm a firm believer in sitting down with somebody face to face and let's work through issues. I think that's the only way you can do it. You're not going to do it over social media. You're not going to do it by something in, just an article in the paper. You have to sit down and talk to people face to face, talk about emotions, be honest with the issues that are happening in our community. And I think and I'm not just talking about community leaders, but people. Right? The more people and the more groups that we can get together to sit down and have those honest and frank discussions, I think the closer we can bring this community.
I agree.
We do have another question on Facebook. And before I say that, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. We are all spaced for social distancing, so do not take the distance between all of the participants in this conversation as any indication of their actual closeness. This question is from Carrie Jackson Mayhew. How can residents help HPD cultivate an environment of curiosity, trust, and relationships in Hutchinson?
Yeah, that's a very great question. And that's an amazing thing right there in the fact that you have a community member reaching out to us saying, how can we help build this relationship? Because that's awesome, because we try to reach out to them, and to have the community reach back out to us. Couple of things that we did shortly after I got here was we created a fixed beat system, and basically what that means is there are officers assigned specifically to different parts of the city, and they own that part of the city. They should get to know everybody in that community. They have a beat email and a beat phone number, and those are all out in the city and our social media page and the city's website. And my suggestion would be reach out to your beat officer, send them an email. So we get them daily, and just say, hey, can you just stop by? I'd just like to sit down with you and just talk about what's going on in the neighborhood, talk about what's going on in Hutchinson. We've had officers sit down and have milk and cookies or tea with somebody and just have those conversations about the community. We try to reach out to the community, but it's just an amazing thing and a great feeling to us when the community actually reaches back out to us.
That's good. That's really good. Something that we kind of talked about as well, and as we get deeper into this conversation, I'm kind of curious about, what you would do if an officer left a community under bad pretenses, was terminated due to cause, and came to your community. What kind of protections does local police departments and communities have against predatory officers?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because you have seen that in the past where officers, a bad officer, bad officer jumps from one agency to another. And I can tell you that at the Hutchinson Police Department, we do extensive backgrounds on all our officers. If they were terminated from another department, they're not going to get a job here. There's a reason they were terminated from another department, most likely. The great thing that Kansas implemented here just within the last few years was an organization, Kansas Seapost, that oversees a certification for law enforcement officers. So if I have an officer that I terminate for whatever reason, for cause, I notify Kansas Seapost of the reason for termination. They have their own investigators at Kansas Seapost. And so then I'm on the phone with one of their investigators, and they look into the reason for termination, and they can pull their Kansas certification as a law enforcement officer. So I have had to terminate individuals from my agency, from the old administration, that I felt had no business being police officers. And I personally reached out to Seapost and said, I'm sending this to you. Please investigate it. I don't think they should ever be allowed to be a police officer again. In an attempt to get their certification pulled so that they cannot go to another agency. Because it's not just about us in Hutchinson, it's about our nation, it's about our world, right? And you don't want to send a bad officer to another agency. And so I would like to think that all the chiefs in the state are as vigilant as I am and as passionate as I am about the profession of law enforcement and about only having quality people in law enforcement. I don't think that's probably the case. I would be naive to think that. But all I know is that I'm going to do my part.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that. Again, we're kind of in a luxury space to be able to have these conversations and to get to know our local PD. What kind of things do you think, I like the question that Carrie asked about things that we could do as a community. What kinds of things do you think you would have done if you were in that space in Minneapolis? I mean, what would you have done in that situation?
Wow, that's a hard question. It's not a hard question, but I would like to think that I'm never in that position. I would like to think that the ethical and morals that we have inside our agency would never put us in that position. Do we make mistakes? Yeah. Have we made mistakes since I've been here? Absolutely. I would like to think that I would have officers that would have stepped in and prevented that situation from occurring. But to answer your question, those officers would have been pulled from duty and suspended, pending an investigation. I would have brought in an outside agency, either the KBI or the FBI, to investigate the criminal actions, whether there was criminal actions by those particular officers. And at the same time, I would have undergone an administrative investigation through our agency. One is related to their employment. The outside investigation would be related to any criminal acts that they may have. And so those are kept separate. I wouldn't want to be a part of the criminal investigation. That needs to be by an outside agency because it needs to be unbiased. And it needs to be somebody else that can come in and judge the agency. And I would hate to draw a conclusion not having investigated that, but I can tell you this, that I don't think there's a law enforcement officer that I know out there that thinks by watching the video of the specific officer that had his knee across that individual's neck. I don't think there's one officer that I know that would think that was okay and that person should ever be a police officer again. Yeah. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Well, I know that there's been a lot of calls for arrests and things like that. I appreciate that you're sharing that you would invite outside investigation. I know you've experienced outside investigations when you came on and that was going on at that time. Do you feel that the termination was hasty? Do you feel like it should have been an admin leave versus a termination? What do you think?
That's difficult to say simply because I don't know what work they did in that interim, right? I don't know what they did. We do have a process here in the United States, due process. We have due process for employment. That is something that when I suspend somebody from duty, we take their gun, we take their badge, I take their law enforcement powers away from them, and they're suspended. They no longer can do any harm to the community. And I feel that I owe it to my organization, I owe it to the community to get to the bottom of what happened. Because the community wants answers. They need answers. How did this happen? How could this ever happen? And I feel that you have to find those answers because that's what the community wants to know. That's what we need to know. I do believe that action against officers that act in that manner should be swift. It should be decisive, but it should be based on facts. And I think you have to gather all the facts so you're educated and you can educate the community. Then you can sit down to the community and say, listen, this is what happened. This is the action that I took. This is what we're going to do moving forward to become better. And I think that that's being open and transparent with the community, and I think that's the way you have to handle those situations.
Do you think, so for me, I think about the emotional impact that something so egregious has. And because of that emotional impact, sometimes decisions have to be made that aren't necessarily structured, according to what we've always done. Do you feel like you would find yourself in a circumstance where an immediate termination would be warranted?
I suppose there's a possibility of that. I suppose there's a possibility that the action is so egregious that you can't work for me. And so I know that I have legal counsel. I know that most chiefs have some type of legal counsel, and that was something that you certainly would discuss with them. But there are some actions by law enforcement that you can easily look at, the community can easily look at and say that person should never ever be a police officer. They should never be allowed to serve this community because that's not service. So yes, I think there are those instances, but that doesn't devoid us of the responsibility to still find out what happened and share that with the community in full disclosure. And I know that that is another thing that we're trying to overcome in law enforcement. Law enforcement for years and years has been this secret organization behind closed walls. And I think that we have to be transparent with the community. We have to be open and honest with our faults, with our mistakes, and we have to hold ourselves accountable and be honest about that.
Yeah.
That actually transitions really well to a question we have on Facebook. Does HPD have the ability to turn their body cams off, or are they required to keep them on while they're on duty?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. Our officers, yes, they have the ability to turn them off. That's the way all body cameras are designed. Quite simply, to leave them on for a 12-hour shift and have 12 hours of footage of them driving around in their car or something like that is impractical because you can't have that much data. Our officers are required, not every agency is like this, but our officers are required to have their body cameras on every time they have an encounter with somebody in the community. Every time, and keep them on for the duration of that encounter. If there are some exceptions to that, if they're dealing with, let's say, a rape victim or something like that in a rape exam, obviously that's not something that we would want to videotape. But generally speaking, they have to have their cameras on during every encounter, and they're held accountable for that, and they're disciplined if their cameras are turned off or not on. We routinely have opportunity to review their videos and see their videos. We watch a lot of calls. We have use of force. My professional standards, we watch a lot of videos to make sure our officers are doing things properly and that they have their body cams on. And they're disciplined. They're disciplined for not having their body cameras on. Probably more strictly they are than if they would have left their body cameras on and done something inappropriate. Because it just appears like you're trying to cover something up.
I did have a question. We realize now that your credentials of both of you are not on the screen. So for people joining us late, this is Police Chief Jeffrey Hooper and Datjaeda Moore, who is our Human Relations Officer here at the city. So go ahead.
So in respect to body cameras, and it gets me to think, how helpful have they been for your department?
Body cameras are amazing. They are amazing because anytime that you're in those situations, officers have one thing that they remember, or they have one side of the story. Other people can have another side of the story, but it's really hard to dispute video footage. And what we have to realize, though, is they're not foolproof either. Body cameras don't capture everything. They look in one direction, where our peripheral and the way we see things as humans is sometimes different than body cameras. But I will tell you this, is that I can't even tell you the number of people that have filed a complaint against our officer, thinking that the officer was rude or did something inappropriate or something like that. And the first thing that my professional standards commander does is he says, hey, would you like to come in and sit down with me, discuss this, and let's take a look at the body camera footage.
So that's available to anyone?
Yes, absolutely. Anyone can come in and do that. We'll sit down with them. We'll let them see the body camera footage, and they'll sit down together and they'll review that footage. And together they get to decide, hey, I think the officer's actions were appropriate, or no, they weren't appropriate, and here's how I think that those actions were inappropriate. And that's how we start an investigation, so they can sit down together and they can review that. Because sometimes when emotions are high, perception is different, both on the officer's part and the citizen's part. And it's really valuable, I think, for us to have the ability to sit down and them to point out to us, this is where I think your officer was wrong. Or for us to say, hey, please show us what actions our officer took that you think that were inappropriate. And I think that is just an invaluable thing. So lots of times the person who filed the complaint just feels better being able to sit down, review what actually happened, get their message out, and know that we're going to look into any misdeeds that the video shows.
Yeah. I appreciate that. You know, the real purpose of sometimes having these conversations, not indicating that Hutchinson is a space that has a problem with their police department, but there is concern with racial relationships here, and I think that probably takes root from years and years and years ago. As we're moving it forward, I'm just grateful, and I want to say this, I'm grateful that we have people in position that are able to kind of come ahead of the problem before it happens to us locally. We, as the Human Relations Commission, have been working with a contractor who came out and did a conference with us, Deconstructing Equity, back in February. And one of the things that we learned in that is that an image that stays true to me is that we're all in this boat. And while one side might be thinking, we're all responsible to kind of pull the water out of it so that we can survive. And I think that is what I hope that we can do in this situation. I don't anticipate to see a George Floyd issue here in Hutchinson, but also I know that mistakes do happen. And I do hope that having this relationship, this open door relationship with the police department, allows the community to be able to air that grievance and that concern if, God forbid, something like that were to occur to this community locally. So that's kind of the questions that I had. Chief, did you have some things you wanted to share, anything specific?
I think that, you kind of hit it a little bit. One of the things that I value more than anything is the opportunities that I've had to build relationships with you, with members of the NAACP and members of that community. We have an advisory committee here that we assemble once a month. And there's some amazing people on that committee of the minority community. Then they get to hear what's going on inside the department, and we get to hear what's going on in the community. And that committee has been unbelievably valuable to me in helping build those relationships. I do want people to know, and this is my promise to this community, there are people behind these uniforms, men and women, sometimes really young men and women. Are we going to be perfect? No, we're not going to be perfect. But I can tell you this. My promise is that when we make a mistake, we will own up to that mistake. We will hold ourselves accountable. There'll be consequences for that. And then as an organization, we'll use that as an opportunity to grow, be better servants of this community. And I had a young lady just last night. When I said that very thing to her, she says, Chief, we're going to hold you accountable to that. We're going to hold you to that. And I would expect nothing less from this community, because that's the standard I hold myself to, and I want this community to hold my department and my agency to that same standard.
I agree. Accountability, integrity, honesty, professionalism, those are the things that we expect from Hutch PD. I want to mention that we'll continue being able to connect with Chief Hooper on Tuesday at, I believe it's at 7 o'clock. We're going to be doing a forum, a public forum at Memorial Hall. It's going to be open to the community, open to the public to come in and have a Q&A session. Sometimes because of the relationship that I've been afforded to with Chief Hooper, there's things that I know that they are trying to do, but there's a community at large that has questions and maybe not feeling comfortable doing it in this space. Will come and join us on Tuesday at 7 o'clock at the Memorial Hall. And then Sunday we're going to do a Black Lives Matter protest, and really the impetus of that is that a black life was unfortunately lost in a very terrible, disheartening way. And we want to stand in unity in recognizing the life of George Floyd and recognizing that black men, especially across this country, have experienced so much in these last, just in these last few weeks, it seems. And so that protest, and the protest is the impetus of saying, hey, we stand in against that behavior. Not that we're against a people, we're against the behavior that caused the death of George Floyd. So join us on Sunday at 2 o'clock at the courthouse. If there's other questions, I'm happy to take them, or I'll turn it over to Rebecca. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Not seeing any more questions. I just want to thank everybody for being here. I think that is one of the things that makes Hutchinson such a great place to live, is even when we have problems, when we have these struggles, we have people that are willing to do the hard work and sit down and have these conversations. So I appreciate everyone that's joined us, and I appreciate both of you being willing to sit here and be vulnerable and on the spot to talk about these things. So seeing no more questions, thanks again for everyone who's joined us, whether it be through Facebook or Channel 7, or if you're watching this later or on YouTube. We really appreciate this, and just remember, reach out and have these tough conversations, and continue to explore ways that we can make our community better and more united. So